Buckle up, folks. We are going to rank the position groups within the AFC North today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Crabbs from Locked On Dolphins. And we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league. I'm a Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to issue a big thank you, shout out, and welcome to our everydayers. Those of you who make Locked On NFL Scouting your first listen every day, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started.
Joe, we are going to rank all the position groups. Generally speaking, they're bucketed in a way that allows us to do some timely, content-friendly production of this show. But before we do need to acknowledge the New York Giants' atrocious Centennial uniforms that did make me gouge my eyeballs out yesterday.
Terrible. I mean,
what are we doing?
Right. Like, even the video didn't save it. You can watch a video and be like, oh, well, this pays homage to 1928 and 1933 and 1938. And it's like, let's just leave that in the history. Let's leave that in the past and not have this hybrid of the Montreal Canadiens, the Michigan Wolverines, and the Steelers Bumblebees. Like, an absolute egregious kit.
Also, like, they pulled from three different uniforms to blend together to make one even worse uniform, right? Like, if you're going to pay homage to, like, your history or your anniversary of whatever, shouldn't you just go to that uniform? Like, why are you pulling from three different eras of like new New York Giants football from like when you were first created? And if you had the chance to pick from everything, how was that the combination of things that you picked?
Yeah.
Tan pants.
Yeah.
I guess we're wearing our tan shirts for the Giants tan pants.
I call this pistachio color, right? Wouldn't you say that?
Mine's a khaki.
Oh, well, maybe it's showing up weird. This is literally pistachio. That's the color I ordered.
No. Yeah. You'll need to text me a photo because I don't believe that's green.
Oh, okay. I don't know what to tell you, man. It's pistachio. Go to legends.com. It's the aviation t-shirt. It's pistachio.
All right. So we agree consensus. The biggest thing of consensus we will agree upon, and everybody who's watching, whether you're a Steelers, Ravens, Bengals, or Browns fan, the Giants uniforms are atrocious.
Yeah.
They are an abomination and should never see the light of day.
Probably the last thing that
we'll all agree upon.
We will all agree upon the rest of the way. Now, you and I agree upon this because we've done the work together, but it's, nobody wants to hear that their team's not the best at something, and they're about to find that out. So,
also, it's worth, there's a disclaimer. There's a disclaimer on the show. Different teams play different styles of football, and that is not necessarily fully reflected in the rankings that we are going to do, because there's things like positional value and positional weight that doesn't really get roped into this conversation. We're instead looking at the raw outputs of your entire skill group. And if you're a team that runs a lot of 11, like Cincinnati, your importance of your 11 personnel grouping versus Baltimore, who runs a lot of 21 and 22, like there's divides. Right. And we're not ranking the wide receiver rooms. We're ranking your skill groups as a totality. So I guess that's a good time to, if you're watching on YouTube, bring up the sheet. And I clicked the wrong button right off the jump. So that's a good start. Quarterbacks, skill players, offensive line, defensive line, and edge, linebackers, and secondary is how we are breaking this out. So 6 segments, 2 per segment, and we're already 5 minutes into segment 1, so I think that means we get a boogie a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do quarterbacks. Ranking the quarterbacks in the AFC North. And you and I agree that it's this order. Cincinnati number 1 with Joe Burrow. Lamar Jackson number 2 with the Baltimore Ravens. Deshaun Watson 3 with the Cleveland Browns. And Russell Wilson with the Pittsburgh Steelers number 4.
So obviously the point of contention for Baltimore fans will be, well, Lamar's won 2 MVPs. Why is he not number 1? And it is the quarterback room. I think those 2 players, Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson, are very close. But I think with what Jake Browning showed last season versus Josh Johnson as the primary backup quarterback in Baltimore is kind of what leads me to be like, yeah, if we're looking at the quarterback room, I think you could very easily have an argument between the 2 players. I think Browning's a better backup.
Yeah, significantly. So,
but those 2 starters are significantly better than the other 2 starters with what we know right now. So that's why I kind of view it as 2 separate tiers within the
I agree.
division.
You can debate 1 and 2, but it's some combination of Baltimore and Cincy. You can debate 3 and 4, but it's some combination of the Browns and the Steelers.
Correct. So that's our pecking order of the quarterback rooms, which is obviously very heavily influenced by the starters: Cincinnati, Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. Now, the skill group is interesting because you have some teams that are wide receiver heavy. You have some teams that are tight end and running back heavy. And I think that's where it gets to be very interesting to kind of look at them through the lens of all of that together as like an element of your supporting cast.
Yeah, and I think it's the right way to do it. And this somewhat helps us overcome what you talked about in the lead about some teams are going to value positions differently based on what their offense is. And I think by lumping together receivers, tight ends, and running backs, it helps us achieve that the best we can.
Which is a nice teaser for us to reveal that the number 1 in totality skill group that we have in this division, not adjusting for what your primary personnel is, just looking at the entirety of each of the rooms combined, the Baltimore Ravens with Derrick Henry and Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely and Zay Flowers, who grades as the lowest wide receiver 1 in the division.
Right.
But the combination of the tight ends with Derrick Henry, with Patrick Ricard as well as a player that gets a lot of run for them, this is the most robust and deepest skill group in all phases that we have scored here in the AFC North.
So number 2 is the Cleveland Browns. And obviously an Amari Cooper franchise cornerstone, having a Jerry Jeudy to go with him. You certainly have an exciting tight end in David Njoku. A lot of depth at running back. And certainly we are giving them almost all of the points that Nick Chubb deserves based on his status in the league, but that's something to be mindful of. But there's a lot of depth to the Cleveland Browns, and I think that's probably what really separates them compared to the bottom 2 teams.
Well, and it's pretty close between Cincinnati and Cleveland. And again,
close, yeah.
If we graded Cleveland without Nick Chubb, I will tell you right now that the Bengals would be in front of the Cleveland Browns. So at the beginning of the season, when we do this and we say, okay, who's actually dressing for week 1?
Yeah.
I would expect Cincinnati to actually be reflected and to be here in the second spot. But we talked about this when we did Cincinnati. The amount of weight and pressure that sits on Chase and Higgins as far as the catalysts and the identity of that offense, along with Joe Burrow, is heavier than I think any other 1-2 punch in this division, right? Because there's the depth behind it is Yusevish and Charlie Jones and Jermaine Burton as a rookie this year. And Sample is primarily a blocking tight end, and Gesicki, who we have our concerns with. and Chase Brown is a second-year player that didn't get a lot of run.
Yeah.
And Zach Moss coming in, right? So it's just the track record beyond your two pillar players that are cornerstone players, you got some concerns with. You got some questions with.
So the Steelers are last here, and love your running backs, love your tight ends, but you can't have George Pickens and nothing else at receiver and feel like you're going to have what it takes to rank, higher than the teams ahead of you in this division. That's just really what it comes down to. You have replacement level players and a rookie in Roman Wilson as your receivers to go with Pickens. So like Freiermuth, love him, love Darnell Washington, fun backfield tandem of Warren and Harris, but there's not enough depth at receiver to go any higher than this.
What's interesting is they kind of went after a few niche players well, and I know we're up against the break, but like Cordarrelle Patterson, right? Like, is he going to get a disproportionately large workload? And we talked about that with Arthur Smith and the parallels between Atlanta's skill group and Pittsburgh's skill group as far as a distribution where the talent exists. Where you have some players. We gave 2 quality starter grades out in this group and 2 adequate starter grades out to Harris and Warren as adequate starters and Freiermuth and George Pickens as quality starters. But the wide receiver well beyond that is just empty right now with either you don't know or it's not good. And that is enough for them to land in 4th place here in the AFC North.
We are going to focus in on the trenches on the other side of it, so be sure to stick with us. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. I got in on the action yesterday at FanDuel. I was doing some live golf bets. I also got in on Pete Alonso. I put some money down on him hitting a home run against the Phillies last night. Well, that happened. That was right? That was a big hit. I didn't do so hot with basketball. I went in on some Joker props, and I don't know if you saw it, but the Wolves won by like 50 points, so that didn't really work out. But I had fun nonetheless, and did well on the golf and baseball. So check it out. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
You would swear that this Scotty Scheffler thing, based on how Adam Schefter is responding to it, is like an oar in the depth chart. You think you've never seen this before.
Brother, I'm not getting into the Schefter.
Very, very surreal thing going on with the golf major, obviously, but just I have push notifications on for Schefter, and I get a tweet every 3 minutes.
Right, and those are there to find out if the Arizona Cardinals signed a guard. Right, that's why you're right. It's like, wait, what are we talking about?
Oh, it just another one came through right as we came back from break. So it's like, you must think it's an oar in the depth chart. Just the constant obsession with never seen anything like this before. And I think it's fair to say we've never seen anything like that before.
Quite the story.
Offensive lines. We're going to get back into it here in the AFC North. And
pretty clear #1, Kyle Crabbs.
This is and obviously health is somewhat dependent here as well as their standing in the skill players, but Cleveland with a bunch of studs on the offensive line. The offensive interior is very stout. This time last year, we actually had, I think, Wyatt Teller's a cornerstone too. Now he's been moved to a quality starter, but the development of Ethan Posick is no small thing. I will also say this for the offensive lines. The way that they're scored right now, I think mid-season it will look pretty different because you have 3 projected rookie starters in this division that are going to trend one way or another, and it's going to help push those units one way or another. Yeah. Right. So I will say that too, out in front of if we have a rookie in the starting lineup versus somebody who's an established adequate level starter or quality starter, we can't give them the same points right now because it's May 17th. Right. Like we just can't quantify it. So Pittsburgh is penalized a little bit right now for 2 projected starters on the offensive line that are rookies with Troy Fautanu and Zach Frazier, but that's a story for a couple more spots in the rankings. Because the Cincinnati Bengals, the Baltimore Ravens by the slimmest of margins. Like this is legit almost a tie.
Well, I think with
No, I lied.
Yeah,
was right.
you did lie. Yep.
I was looking at the wrong column. It's the Bengals.
The Bengals are number 2, and what it really comes down to is I don't think there's a ton of ceiling with this offensive line until Amari Mims is ready to go. But you have like a baseline level guy at every single spot, right? Like not a lot of ceiling, but you don't have tomato cans or at all. And so I think that helps them a ton. And Amari Mims waiting in the wings can really elevate the ceiling of this group.
I think this is the first time in 3 years. Oh, there's another Schefter tweet. I think the Bengals, for the first time in 3 years, is the first time we've had an adequate level starter at all 5 spots on the offensive line.
Yeah.
So that speaks to exactly what you're talking about, the consistency where it doesn't blow you away. And if you knew what you were getting in Roger Rosengarten as the projected started right tackle for Baltimore, Baltimore may check in front.
Yeah.
Because they do have cornerstone player in Tyler Linderbaum. And if Rosengarten plays at a baseline level that you feel good about early on, I think that would push Baltimore with their cornerstone at center. And then Ronnie Stanley is still a quality starter. He used to be a cornerstone, but is still a quality starter. I think those impact players, maybe once we know a little bit more about Baltimore's, would put them at 2. But right now, just the consistent floor and established skill of all of Cincinnati's 5 guys. And we also do take into account the swing players inside and outside. I think that's worth acknowledging here too. Has Cincinnati out in front, and then Pittsburgh with the 2 rookies that we don't know anything about right now comes in 4th place here.
The important thing about Pittsburgh is this is the offensive line with the highest ceiling of any team in this division, and I don't think it's particularly close. So yeah, they come in last.
Cleveland?
No, I think there's more ceiling with Pittsburgh. I don't think you're going to see higher levels of play from Jed Wills or Jack Conklin, and I think if anything, Joe Bitonio is not going in the right direction. Meanwhile, I've got mammoth potential in Broderick Jones and Troy Fatanu and Zach Frazier, and we already have a really good guard pair. So yeah, at least in my opinion, I think it's the highest ceiling O-line.
It's the biggest boomer bust, right? The second-year player in Broderick Jones and 2 rookies that is going to
that's fair.
Really determine where that one goes.
Very fair.
But as of right now, a lot of that is incomplete because 2 of the guys are just finishing rookie mini camps for them. The defensive line, Pittsburgh, we hope you're sticking with us because
here you are. It's your moment.
You're going to go right here at the top of the list here. 2 cornerstone pass rushers in Highsmith and TJ Watt on the outside. Another cornerstone on the interior with Cam Hayward. That amount of elite talent is going to put you in a pretty rarefied air as far as the grades on the defensive line. And I think that's very well reflected with how we have their defensive line graded out here.
Yeah, and then a couple of really good-looking players in Keanu Benton and Larry Ogunjobi that helps them score as sufficient level starters as well. This is a good defensive line division, but I think Pittsburgh's just a tick above all of them.
Yeah, 3 cornerstones moves the needle
a lot.
Yeah, I mean that score difference in itself is pretty huge. Now, second place is the Cleveland Browns, who have their own cornerstone player in Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith. I think they really raised the floor of the defensive interior between Dalvin Tomlinson, and we'll see what Michael Hall gives you this year as a rookie. But Tomlinson and Shelby Harris as a 1-2 punch on the inside as projected starters. You feel really good about that. And I also think it's worth mentioning with the cornerstones, we do have a tier within the tier.
Yeah.
As far as like the elite of elites. So we don't want to put Myles Garrett as a cornerstone and put him in the same bucket as Alex Highsmith, who we also have graded as a cornerstone,
right,
and have those worth the same amount of points. Now, I know TJ Watt versus Myles Garrett is always a huge debate annually, and you can both your fan bases can rest easy knowing that they are both in the tier above the tier within the cornerstone.
Right.
They get a little extra point juice for being the elite of the elites.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents there.
All right. So at number 3, we have it's Baltimore.
Baltimore by 0.08.
Yeah,
points over Cincinnati. It's close.
Super, super tight. Obviously, Justin Matabweek becoming an absolute monster was big here. And, we're high on the trajectory of Odafe Owe. We love Michael Pierce. We love Travis Jones. Kyle Van Noy is just like a rock solid fit for what they do defensively. So depth, starters, impact, they got a lot going for them. But, I mean, they're still third in this division. And I think it's more about what else is in the division than anything that they're lacking.
Yeah. I think for Cincinnati, everybody has at least one cornerstone on the defensive line.
Yeah.
Right. For Baltimore, Matabweek took that jump this year. Cincinnati has Trey Hendrickson. I think Baltimore's a bit of a deeper group. And because of that, they end up checking in front of Cincinnati here to bring home the defensive line. It is worth, as we get ready for the break, reminding everybody that not all of these are graded equally. Like we're going to do linebacker room next, for example, right? Linebackers is worth the least amount of points, but when you see it stacked up here on the board, you're just going to see 1 through 4 like everything else.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind because when we get to the very end of this process and this project, the positional weights will kick in to see the total roster score.
One little note here also with Cincinnati being 4th, which feels so weird because I think they have a very good defensive line. I would bet that while they might be 4th in this division, all 4 of these teams are probably in the top 15 of the NFL. You know what I mean?
I could probably pull that up and see where the 4th place score would have finished in last year's group.
All right. You do that. I'll tell everybody about our friends over at eBay. So be sure to stick with us. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
The Cincinnati Bengals defensive line grade last year would have been equal to the 12th best score in the NFL last year.
So you're teetering on a top 10.
Call out by you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kyle, I'm still bothered that you think my shirt's tan, man. What? This is very clearly a pistachio.
I'm going to take a picture and send it to you.
I don't know, man.
And you're going to tell me that these are 2 totally different colors and not just slightly different hues of the same color wheel. You go ahead and tell me that as we get back into it with linebackers here, and I can pull up the sheet.
All right,
let's do it.
All right, linebackers.
You get the text?
I did get the text. Yeah.
Go ahead, look at it.
Looking like a green shirt and a green shirt, like a pistachio seafoam type situation here, Kyle Crabbs.
Yeah, we'll put the tweet out on X.
I don't know, man.
And say what color is Kyle and Joe wearing today on the show, and see how many people come back with pistachio and kick rocks.
Well, because they don't know the term pistachio, but to say that it's brown is crazy to me.
It's not brown, it's tan.
Tan.
I bet more people would say tan than green. More people would say tan than green. All right. Linebackers in this division. Obviously, the
tight, man. Jeez.
Big flip was Patrick Queen goes from Baltimore to Pittsburgh. Right? That's the big headline in the AFC North as it pertains to linebackers in this division. But this is a pretty good group of backers as well. I think you look at kind of where the talent stacks and how many quality starters and adequate starters are collected across this division for your top linebackers. And this is probably going to be a very well-represented group in the full lexicon of the league when we stack this one through 32 as well, across all 32 teams, would be my expectation.
But coming in at number 1, the Cincinnati Bengals.
The Cincinnati Bengals.
Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt. I think that's the best pair in this division. And then, Yeah, and then having like Akeem Davis-Gaither, who I don't really trust to play linebacker, but has become a very good special teams player for them. They're the top.
And it's also worth acknowledging with how we are grading this position. You don't see a lot of 3 linebacker stuff. Now, we grade 3 linebackers, but this used to be you needed 3 linebackers on the field to Sam Michael Will all the time, and they were all off-ball guys. We're not playing that game anymore, right? Like your
Right.
base is 2 linebackers. So we do try to encapsulate your depth, but then also who your volume snap takers are going to be with the 3 that we grade. Now, the second place team in this division is the Pittsburgh Steelers after adding Patrick Queen into their ranks to go with Cole Holcomb, who we have graded as an adequate level starter. Now, there's some durability questions there. Elandon Roberts is a very skill-specific type player, checks in as a quality depth player for them. So you have a quality starter, an adequate starter, and then you also have a quality depth player. And then, oh, by the way, he's not graded right now.
Yeah.
But there's a pretty realistic chance that Peyton Wilson gets some run for this team. And by midseason, if he is getting run, is just another notch in the belt for them. I think Pittsburgh probably has the deepest linebacker room in the division. Not that we're necessarily grading that extensive.
Yeah, good take. I'm aligned with that take for sure. And it's probably been a while since we could say that about Pittsburgh. So well done.
Yep.
So number 3 is
Cleveland
the
Browns.
Cleveland Browns with the emergence of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Get a high floor player in Jordan Hicks to be his running mate. Concerned about the depth here, but that's a really solid pair. And spoiler, as you know, that Baltimore's number 3 or number 4 in this division.
Yeah.
But here's like Roquan Smith's the best linebacker in the division. There's no question about it. So like, congrats, you got that. That's a big deal. But right now, the running mate is Trenton Simpson. We don't know a thing about who Trenton Simpson is in the NFL.
And the guys behind that are a lot of like special teams type guys, or guys that frankly have not gotten any elevation.
Right. So Roquan Smith wasn't enough to carry this unless Trenton Simpson's awesome. If he's awesome, we'll update the score that he gets and it'll look different, but we don't know. We just don't know about Trenton Simpson yet.
Right.
It's encouraging that they were able to let Patrick Queen walk, knowing they spent a year with Trenton Simpson, but we don't know yet.
Right. I think if Trenton Simpson comes in and provides baseline level starting linebacker play, I could see Baltimore, because of the power of Roquan Smith, who is the only cornerstone that we have graded in the division. I could see them jumping Cleveland for sure, and potentially pushing Pittsburgh as far as just like the numerical scoring that comes out of this. Now, in the secondary, we count 7 players. This is a heavy hitter. You have your outside corners, your projected starting nickel. Steelers fans were very gracious to let us know that their UDFA, who has been there for a week, is probably going to be the starting nickel.
That was nothing to help with our concerns.
Right. Both your starting safeties, and then a 4th corner and a 3rd safety. So there's a lot of variables that check in here for this position group specifically with how it's all bucketed together. That said, this one is really close with the top. The top 3 are all very competitive with one another as far as the scores. But the Cleveland Browns have the top secondary as we have it graded here and now at this point in time. When you consider the emergence of Martin Emerson and solidifying himself as a quality starter, Denzel Ward, they got one of the better nickels that exists in the league with Greg Newsome at their disposal as well. And then at safety, Juan Thornhill and Grant Delpit is not the most dynamic safety room. Honestly, if you ranked just the safeties, it might rank last amongst the starters because we have 2 cornerstones in Baltimore. Yeah. We have a cornerstone and a quality and an adequate starter in Pittsburgh. And then we have a quality starter and an adequate starter in Cincinnati to go along with Cleveland. But the 3rd safety in Cincinnati is better than the 3rd safety in Cleveland. So the corners are doing the heavy lifting here for Cleveland, but their safeties are a plus asset when it's all said and done too.
I think the big separator with Cleveland being the top secondary in this division for us is that every other team, when you look at the 5 starters, 2 outside corner, nickel, 2 safeties, every team has at least like a rookie that we don't know enough about, or a second-year player that we don't know enough about, right? That's not true with this mix of Ward, Emerson, Newsome, Thornhill, Delpit. You know exactly what those guys are.
Yeah.
So number 2 is the Baltimore Ravens.
Again, by the slimmest of margins over Cincinnati. But yes, we have Baltimore as number 2. The safeties are doing the heavy work here with cornerstones in Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton. Marlon Humphrey still holding on to that quality starter label.
Yeah.
But the durability and him slowing down with some of the injuries is a little bit of a concern there. Nate Wiggins can be much needed reinforcements there.
Yes.
To go along with Brandon Stevens, who's will probably be one of the better CB4 options that we grade across the league when it's all said and done.
Yeah, and I would guess that I'm sure they would love for Nate Wiggins to be ready to go, have Stevens and Wiggins playing on the outside, and then Humphrey can do his work in the slot. That would be their, I'm sure, perfect scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So number 3 is the Cincinnati Bengals. Love the work. Yeah, it's close. Love the work that they were able to get done here with their safety room, bringing in Geno Stone, bringing back Von Bell. I think that is a big deal based on the regression they had at that position last year. But of course, Mike Hilton, a big part of this equation as an elite caliber slot corner. And then we like the floor of Cam Taylor-Britt. And DJ Turner got run. We'll see how he does. Obviously, transitioning Dax Hill down to the corner position. And then what they got in the depth player in Jordan Battle last year was pretty impressive late in the season. So not without questions here, but coming in 3rd.
So if Cincinnati is going to chase down Baltimore when it's all said and done, Dax Hill is going to be the catalyst that makes that happen, right? I think that just the complete unknown variable of him switching to corner.
Well, and how much better
what DJ Turner is in year 2.
Right.
I mean, that whole other outside corner spot for them, I guess I should say, is going to be the deciding variable for where they fall once they start playing the games.
Right. What is the ceiling of Cam Taylor-Britt and DJ Turner? We'll find out. I'm guessing that they'd love for Dax Hill to be the eventual successor to Mike Hilton in the slot. Like that would
probably make the most sense based on where he played in college at Michigan.
Right.
And then Pittsburgh, obviously, you have an ascending player in Joey Porter Jr. You have a cornerstone in Minkah Fitzpatrick. And the rest of it feels kind of baseline-ish, right? Like you feel okay about Deshaun Elliott being your other starting safety. I think he's on par with Geno Stone and Grant Delpit as the second safeties in this division for the other respective teams that don't have 2 cornerstone players back there to work with. But how much does Dante Jackson continue to slow down is a question. Who ultimately does take the nickel spot? I do think they're maybe one of the more questionable depth teams in the secondary when you consider Baltimore's got somebody we had tabbed as a quality or as an adequate starter as their 4th corner. We have Cincinnati, somebody who we have tabbed as an adequate starter as their 3rd safety, right? And for Pittsburgh, it's KZ and Corey Trice. We just really don't know a lot there. So I think the questions in the first 5 and then also the questions with the depth is how they ultimately end up landing here despite Minkah Fitzpatrick's presence in the secondary and Joey Porter. You're excited on what he showed in year 1.
AFC North is the best division in football, in my opinion. And I feel like the Steelers are definitely the team here that are kind of staring up at the competition. They have the most questions. But we know the floor of that team every year is 9 wins. And then from there, how much better can you be from there with Mike Tomlin? But it's going to be a dogfight in the AFC North. I'm not sure we're going to do this the rest of the way for every team on every Friday for the next 7 weeks. I'm not sure it's going to be this balanced. I think you could see a little bit more top heavy. This is a really competitive division.
Well, and I think you mentioned with Pittsburgh and kind of the questions on the offensive side of the ball. They have a lot of youth there. And how they develop that will be important. They have the biggest question at quarterback with what they're doing there. I think all of that's relevant. And I'm glad that you mentioned the coaching because we started implementing that last year. And I think that was a very good clarifier for us to not just look at the roster rankings, but then we do the total team rankings that includes the coaching staffs. And Pittsburgh was one of those teams that got propped up big time. Pittsburgh and the Rams were the two teams that got propped up the most with their coaching staffs versus the caliber of their rosters. And guess what? They both made the playoffs.
Yep.
They went from, you're probably bottom 12 rosters just based off what we know with what you have with top 5 coaching staffs. And they landed in the middle of the pack and then ended up doing very well for themselves throughout the course of that season. So I think you make some great points there. And I know I said this at the beginning of the week, but like you kind of have a threshold for like roster rankings. And then you have like a very, very good playoff probability chance based off of this being the 3 years that we've done this now. I think all of these teams are going to clear that threshold.
But they won't all make it.
But they won't all make it.
Right. 3 did last year, though.
Yep. So I think you reiterating the competitiveness of this division is important context to come out of this because I believe it was 22.5 points or 23 points for your total roster output. If you were above that, you were like 80% of those teams made the playoffs. And I think once we put the quarterbacks in here, once we rank them 1 through 32 and put those scores in, these 4 teams should all clear that threshold with where they're at right now.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a dogfight, like you said. That's going to do it for us here on Locked On NFL Scouting. We're sure you're mad. Let us know in the comments on YouTube. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. We appreciate you guys for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Go buy yourselves a pistachio shirt like Joe Marino, and we'll see you again on Monday.